Till now we have discussed what are ratios and we have also solved problems on ratios. Now it is time to understand what do we mean by proportion. So what is a proportion? When the two ratios are equal, they are said to be in proportion. Very easy to understand. When two or more ratios are equal to each other, we say the ratios are in proportion. For example, I will take two ratios R1 and R2. Let's say R1 is equal to A ratio B and R2 is equal to C ratio D. And the two ratios are in proportion. This means the first ratio A ratio B will be equal to the second ratio C ratio D. We can write this as A over B equal to C over D. So the point is now clear. A ratio B is equal to C ratio D and therefore the two ratios are in proportion. And for a proper representation, we have a symbol for proportion. In place of this equal to, we will have a symbol like this. So this we can write as A ratio B is in proportion with C ratio D. So I hope you now understand what do we mean by a proportion. And if I ask you, can you find D from here if we know A, if we know B, and if we know C? Yes, we can have D very easily from here. D will be equal to B multiplied to C divided by A. Now this D here is known as the fourth proportion of A, B and C. So D is the fourth proportion of A, B and C. So remember this point, D is the fourth proportion and it is equal to B multiplied to C divided by A. Now we will move on to our next point, and for this we have two ratios, A ratio B and we have B ratio C. You can see in the two ratios B is common. Now the two ratios are in proportion. This means they are equal. And what if we know A and we know B and we want to find out C? Yes, it is possible. I will write this as A over B equal to B over C. From here we will have C equal to B multiplied to B, giving us square of B divided by A. So this is how we can have C, and C is known as the third proportion of A and B. So in this way we can find out the third proportion of A and B. Now what about B? If we know A and C, can we find out B? Yes, we can find out B from this. When you perform the cross multiplication, you will have square of B equal to A multiplied to C. From here we will have B equal to under root AC, and B we call the second proportion of A and C, and B, the second proportion, is also known as the mean proportion. So this is all for second proportion, third proportion and fourth proportion. Now what about the first proportion? There is no formula for the first proportion and you won't have questions on first proportion. Let's now move on to some rules. From here we will have A over B equal to C over D. If I add 1 on both the sides, we will have A over B plus 1 equal to C over D plus 1. When you simplify it, you will have A plus B divided by B equal to C plus D divided by D. This we call as Componendo rule. Now similarly, if you subtract 1 on both the sides, you will have A minus B divided by B equal to C minus D divided by D. And this rule we call as Dividendo rule. Now what if I divide the componendo result by the dividendo result? We will have a plus b divided by a minus b equal to c plus d divided by c minus d. And as we have obtained this result using componendo rule and dividendo rule, we call it componendo-dividendo rule. Now what if I take the inverse of this? We will have b over a equal to d over c. And this rule we call invertendo rule. Now moving on to our last rule. In this rule, we will replace b and c. It can be done. We will have a over c and we will have it equal to b over d. And this we call as Alternendo rule. So we are done with all the required rules, and now before we move on to our example problems, I want to give you one more point. If a ratio b is equal to b ratio c and they are equal to c ratio d and so on, then a, b, c, d and so on are in continued proportion, or you can simply say they are in proportion. So this is it. Now we will move on to our example problem number 1. In this problem, we are required to find the fourth proportion of 18, 36 and 48. And we know fourth proportion is d, and it is the fourth proportion of a, b and c. When you compare with the question, you will find 18 is a, 36 is b and 48 here is c. And the fourth proportion d, it is equal to b multiplied to c. This means 36 multiplied to 48 divided by a. A is 18. We know 18 2 times is equal to 36. 2 multiplied to 48 will give us the fourth proportion equal to 96. So this is the answer. Now we will move on to our example problem number 2. In this problem, we are required to find the mean proportion of 0.7 and 2.8. And we know the mean proportion is the second proportion b, and it is the second proportion of a and c. So 0.7 is a and 2.8 is c. And b, the mean proportion, it is equal to under root a multiplied to c. 0.7 multiplied to 2.8 will give you 1.96, and under root 1.96 is equal to 1.4. So this is the answer of our second example problem. And now it is time to move on to the homework problem. In the homework problem, you need to find the third proportion of 36 and 48. We know what is the third proportion. It is c, and it is equal to b squared divided by a. So try to find out the third proportion, and once you have your answer, post it in comment section.